Hi dear students, welcome to La Excellence Daily News Analysis. Today let's discuss the articles of 30th September 2020. The first article is with respect to the wage code that has been a hasty composition. So here, whenever in an examination they try to ask about the critically examine or critically analyze, then in such a case, these kind of articles will give you an insight like how you have to analyze any issue in a critical perspective. This article is a news because recently, as you are all well aware, government has passed 3 laws with respect to the new labor codes. The first one is Industrial Relations Code, the second one Social Security Code, and the third one is Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions. Moving further, Prime Minister has highlighted that Code on Wages would cover a broader spectrum of people compared to the Minimum Wages Act. What are we trying to tell here? So, minimum wages was trying to cover only 30%, whereas we are trying to say Code on Wages would cover the maximum sector of population. But still, it's not evident that how many will be covered here. So, moving further, Code on Wages is the law which is a simplified version of the 4 pieces of legislation. So, you can see over here, the first one is Payment of Wages Act, Minimum Wages Act, Payment of Bonus Act and Equal Remuneration Act. All these 4 acts have been merged and simplified. So, earlier under this 4 acts there was around 10,000 slabs. Now, it's been reduced to 200 slabs. And also earlier there was almost 119 sections. So now we have only 69 sections. See, you need not remember how many sections, how many slabs, all these things, because in the mains perspective nor in the prelims perspective it's important. But what you have to remember is it's a simplification, it's a codification of so many laws that has happened. Then let me come to your mind like what is the simplification? See, earlier laws, they were dealing with inspections, the penalties, who is the competent authority, appellate authority and who has the rule making powers. So it was dealing with all these sections, because of which there was overlapping of authority, all those things. Now, again, what we are trying to do is under this new law, we are giving the authority under section 67 to frame the laws so that it will match all the requirements. Again here, what is more important is not about which section all these things. What is most important is this is said to be one of the biggest piece of delegated legislation. What do I mean by delegated legislation? As you are all well aware, it is the legislature which has to frame the laws. But now legislature has just given a framework how a wage code has to be. Then now executive will frame the rules and regulations. Because of this, there is more authority and more discretion given to the executive rather than the legislature. Even though we consider it to be a simple piece, no longer it would be a simple piece. Then what are the other problems? So first of all, we are trying to combine the most asymmetric laws. So the laws which is not oriented towards each other. So when we are trying to make them into a single code, then definitely there is always a chances that new problems would arise. More than a problems, it's more of an ambiguity. So for example, earlier central government used to fix a floor wage. So now the state government shall not fix minimum wage less than that of the floor wages. So see, but actually in reality what used to happen is whatever rates that the states were fixing, it was more than the minimum wages. So now what we are trying to make, we are trying to create an obligation on the state governments to have a binding minimum wages. So thereby we are trying to create something called as a dual wage systems. So what is dual wage system? One, a binding floor wage and one, a non-binding minimum wage. Are we clear here? So below the floor wage, state government shall not fix the rate, but at the same time minimum wage is not a binding obligation on the state government. So this is what is a dilemmas or ambiguities with respect to the laws. So remember this, floor wages fixed by the central government, minimum wages will be fixed by the state government. So this is the first ambiguity. What is the second ambiguity? See, there was a conflict with respect to the minimum wages and whether this minimum wages was applicable to the wages that is provided under Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. When it went to the courts have overridden that minimum wages act will win the match versus the Narega wage. But however, with this provision explicitly they have told from now onwards Narega will be completely out of the purview of code on wages. See, again we are trying to give an exemption. The next ambiguity is with respect to the claim mechanism. See, what are they trying to say? So whenever there is, when you have to make any claim for the inspections or this thing, so then in such a case, it shall be done not below by the rank of a gazetted officer. A government official who will not have any legal or administrative background to hear such a case, he is trying to hear this. There is no explicit qualifications or experience that is mentioned either for the inspector cum facilitator or for the claim mechanisms or for the appellate authority. So moving further, as you are all well aware, Indian government strongly adheres to Article 50. What is Article 50? Separation of executive from judiciary. Executive should be separate from the judiciary is the core principle. So but now, as you can see, that in the section 52, where there is an officer who has the power to impose a penalty in the place of a judicial magistrate, this is again a violation of the constitutional provision and also a violation of the basic structure of the constitution. So this is not only happening with respect to section 52, but it's also happening in case of a section 21 in bonded labor system also. So by all these provisions, by and large, we are going and trying to violate the basic principle of separation of judiciary from the executive. Then one more provision is this: when any government servant can prove that whatever the mistake or due diligence has happened, it was without his knowledge, then in such a case he'll be exempt from the penal provisions also. So all these things shows one thing: even though we were quite successful with respect to the consolidation of laws, but there is a large number of ambiguities that has to be addressed if India really wants to reap the benefits out of it. Let's move on to the next article, a demarcation in the interest of public order. See, here we are trying to ask a clear demarcation between the roles of district magistrate and the police commissioner. This will be very important from your governance perspective also. Why? District magistrate is responsible for overall administration of the district. Along with that, he also has the responsibility of maintenance of public order, whereas the police commissioner has the responsibility of maintaining law and order of the district and also ensuring the police administration. These two are at the epitome of power at the district level, whereas always there are some kind of conflicts and internal permissions mechanisms between these two people. So in order to ensure law and order, that's where the conflict will come with. So police commissioner would always feel there is no autonomy in their functioning, because for most of the things they have to take the permission of district magistrate. By and large, this is an issue which requires the policy attention. As you are all well aware, as per the 7th schedule of the Constitution, you can see police and public order is kept as a separate thing. Public order is the responsibility of district magistrate. Police is the responsibility of police commissioner. So moving further, we also have to understand the other definition, that is law and order. So law and order is a situation which has to be assessed by the police and ensure that there will not be any kind of inhibitions or violations. But public order is the responsibility of a district magistrate. It is his responsibility to ensure that violence will not spread, and he'll act as a person who eases the tension. So this is a clear delineation of roles and responsibility. But while whenever they try to work, there is always some kind of a conflict, because there is no clear-cut rules when exactly they have to do independent work, when they have to take the permission of a district magistrate. So firstly, clear delineation is not there with respect to the independent actions and the dependent actions. Then the second problem is this: so while the DC has to maintain a public order, he has to make a choice between the property and the life. But if any death happens, then who is responsible? It's not the DC, it's the police machinery. Then the third one is this: the district magistrate will consider the protest as an expression of democracy, like it is a legitimate action. Whereas if it considers it, if it's a small turnaround, then in such a case it will turn up into a riots like Chakma Jam, and the police actions will be immediate necessary. Supreme Court many a times have tried to give in certain guidelines and rules between to differentiate the roles and responsibilities of DC and the police commissioner. So that's where you can see in case of a Ram Manohar Loya versus State of Bihar, Supreme Court has said that public order, the community or the public at large should have got affected. So just mere law and order violation is not the violation of public order. When the law and order violation escalate to the masses and goes to enter the community, that's where the situation of law and order comes. So the role of police is still to maintain the law and order. When it goes beyond their control, it enters into the violent stage, then the DC should come into the picture. So these kind of various judgments has been given by the Supreme Court, but from the examination perspective, you need not remember all these things. What you really have to remember is this: the roles and responsibilities of district magistrate and the police commissioner. So how it can be made further harmonious role. Then second thing what you have to remember is with respect to the roles or the accountability or fixation of responsibility in between these two people. Then third thing, how this will have impact on the governance of the country. And fourth thing what you have to remember is Even the judiciary has tried to clarify the roles and responsibilities, it's more of a public matter which has to be taken care by the legislature, which needs a rethink so that there can be a harmonious relationship between the two, and at the same time we can also ensure public order. Let's move on to the next article, going beyond the Me Too movement. So before we move further, understand the importance of this article in the context of social justice as well as in the context of Indian society, that is the role of women and the workplaces. So what is this Me Too movement? So first of all, for the first time, Indian women came out in the media and said what are the sexual harassments and the sexual violences that they are facing in their workplace. Earlier, there was no law which was supporting the women or which was ensuring a fair justice system for the women for the violences that they were facing at the workplace. So that's why Supreme Court came up with the Vishaka guidelines. So based on the Vishaka guidelines, so recently the government of India has also passed the law that is prevention of sexual violences at the workplaces. But as of now, till today, there is many inadequacies that has to be addressed in this law. Moving further, why is this Me Too movement started? Even though we had this acts, all these things, it's because we have failed to implement the provisions of the act. That is the formal complaint registration process, the grievance readdressal mechanisms, or the internal complaints committee, local complaints committee, etc. All these things which is mentioned in the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplaces Prevention and Prohibition Act 2013. Even though all the provisions are detailedly mentioned, still there is a flaw with respect to the implementation of these provisions. So that's where we can see the examples here, where recently there was an allegation against the Anurag Kashyap by the actor Payal Ghosh with respect to the sexual harassment at the workplace. But it's not that all the allegations that is always made by the woman is said to be true. So they're also trying to give an examples. So wherein the allegations made by woman was proved wrong. One such example is about this Varun Grover. So where a woman had claimed that she was working with him in the Banaras Hindu University, all these things, because of which Netflix brought down the web series of Sacred Games too. And the other allegation is about the comedy company that had an All India backward, that is Utsav Chakraborty, also was accused of the sexual harassment. See, later it was proved that it was wrong, that they were nowhere involved in the sexual allegations. So sometimes there is a sexual allegations or the wrong allegation that is being made. At the same time, always you cannot have a prejudice that women are trying to make a false allegation. If we have to address the things in a fair manner, then what we need to do is always allow all the parties to participate in the probe and the decision makers to assess the credibilities of the parties and the witnesses. So that's where what we are trying to say is the fair solution could be arrived only with the due process of law. So we have to go through the law to ensure that there is a fair procedure that is followed and the justice was given to the victim. So if that has to happen, so first of all we have to build a strong systems in which we can give an assurance to the survivors. So for that to happen, we have to go for a stronger implementation of this law, and we also at the same time have to address the inadequacies with respect to the implementation. And that is the core tenet of this article. Let's move on to the next article. Amnesty halts Indian operations. See, Amnesty International is an international NGO which works for the protection and promotion of human rights. So moving further, recently the government has frozen all their bank accounts, because of which they've stopped their operations. The government has freezed their account under provisions of FCRA, that is Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. So if you want to know the details of FCRA, to whom all it is applicable, how NGOs have to get registered, and why currently there is issues with respect to FCRA 2020 amendment, for all these details you can watch the weekly news analysis which was uploaded in the last Sunday. Let's move on to the next article, the perils of state overreach. See, this is very important article with respect to the public policy and the norms of international law. So, in India, to promote the ease of doing business, we have signed bilateral investment treaties. So, under this bilateral investment treaty, if there is any kind of dispute, so then in such a case, we can set up investor state dispute settlement tribunals. Vodafone, being a foreign company, they tried to buy an Indian share of 67% in the Hutchison SR case. So with this, what happened? There was an amendment made by the Parliament in the Income Tax Act of 2012 saying that whenever a non-resident is purchasing any capital asset, then in such a case, they have to pay a tax which is retrospective from 1962. So with this, Vodafone was supposed to pay a huge amount of dues to the government. It was not only Vodafone, down, even the Vedanta group and many other companies were supposed to pay the dues to the government. So even it was considered to be kind of a tax terrorism in India, even though India always tries to go for ease of doing, but this kind of amendment shook the faith of foreign investors into India. Later, the matter was taken up with the ISDS. So then, finally, ISDS has given a judgment stating that India's imposition of tax liability amounting 22,000 crore on Vodafone is breach of India's BIT obligation. That is, whatever obligations we have signed under bilateral investment treaty, it's kind of a violation of these treaties. With this, court has also said that India has to, reimburse the legal cost of Vodafone up to 40 crore incurred by the Vodafone fighting this case. So, what are the learning lessons for us? So, first of all, it is all judiciary, parliament, executive has to internalize India's BIT obligations, because now out of the public money you are supposed to pay this fine. Second thing, India is always known for its values of respecting rule of law and international norms. So being such a goodwill country, if at all we are using tax inspectors to collect the taxes or changing the rules and regulations by and then in such a case it would definitely affect the India's liberal democratic system. So remember, the first point is internalizing, second thing is with respect to values, third, India may again go and challenge this, but remember, India has always tried to honor the international obligations, so this would be sending a wrong signal against it. Fourth thing is this, it may also have impact on the other two claims, ISDS claims which is pending, that is one with respect to Vedanta, other one with respect to the Kane Energy. So using all these things, government can take it as a populist measure, and as government earlier took away unilaterally all the BITs that were signed, so again it may further consider this to be a bad set of regulation and continue further and try to take away all the BITs, making an argument that these BITs are violating or intriguing into the India's sovereignty. Last but not the least, the very important thing is, with this judgment, it has become clearly evident what is a significant role played by ISDS regime in fostering the international rule of law. Let's move on to the next article, managing the global commons. So what we have to understand here is what is global commons that we are referring here. So global commons refers to the resources which are shared by multiple countries and which cannot be handled by any national jurisdiction. Example, we have sky, we have space, so we have Antarctic and Arctic. So this doesn't belong to any particular country as a whole, okay, it belongs to a global or a global common resource it is. So then in such a case, we can also see other examples like zoonotic diseases like COVID-19, greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity reduction, overfishing, or the plastic waste menace. So for all these things, what we need, should we have a governance structure which is ruled by above, or should we have a governance structure which is bottom up in nature? So in the 1968, a biologist, Garrett Hardin, popularized the notion tragedy of commons. So what do you mean by tragedy of commons? That communities cannot manage their shared resources. So therefore, government has to intervene. But at the same time, there is one more report that is given. It's by Elinor Ostrom, who is a Nobel laureate, who says that communities can govern their resources by themselves. If at all we are trying to impose anything on them, it will not stay for the longer duration. So thereby we have a contrasting view. One is tragedy of commons, where community cannot manage, the government intervention is required. The other one is the view of Elinor, which says that community can manage or go for a self-governance. So in this context, the question what arises is the complicated question, that is, what should be the appropriate scale of governance of the global commons? So should it be through a multilateral negotiations on climate change and other global commons, so which we have done from long time, but still it is limited successful? Or should we go for this, wherein we go for decentralized management of resources, but at the same time polycentral or at multiple level, they are trying to give some kind of guidance as to the decentralized level. So this article by and large suggests that if at all you give the autonomy for the localized approach without any kind of safeguards ensuring for them, so then in such a case there can be a tragedy of commons. So instead what they are trying to say, so let local people decide about the local problems, how it has to be addressed. At the same time, so what we need to give is, we need to empower them with respect to the information and the safeguards that they can use in a case of the failure. So this way we can combine global plus local, so thereby making it to be a global. So the problems of local will be addressed at the local level with the knowledge of the global. Thank you. All the best for your preparation.